don't suppose I ever said I love you. And I found out too late that wasn't right. I'm just now realizing what I lost, that's why I'm crying. And I'm sure gonna miss her, sure gonna miss her, sure gonna miss her every night.
Good afternoon. Today is November 2nd, 2015, and this is a meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Madam Clerk, if you would, please call the roll.
Sure. President Hale.
Present.
Commissioners Chan.
Present.
Camargo.
Here.
Avanesian. Here. Lal.
Here.
We have a full contingent today. If you can go to the next item.
And 2 is consent items. A, approval of the October 5th, 2015 meeting minutes.
Members, are there any changes that anyone would like to make to the minutes from our last meeting?
None from me.
Seeing none, that will be approved without objection.
3 is GWP Commission staff comments.
Commissioners, anything to add today? Mr. Zern, anything from your end?
Sure.
All right. That brings us to 4A.
4A is conservation drought update, Michael DeGhetto.
And on the, on the advice of the city attorney, 4A on our agenda is actually being deferred.
Right.
So we'll go ahead and take up the artificial turf replacement update at our next meeting. But that, I think, brings us to 4B.
Can you reread that, Tanya, as 4B?
Sure. 4B is conservation drought update, Michael DeGhetto.
Thank you, Mr. DeGhetto.
Which is basically the state.
We're having a technical difficulty right now, so we will take a brief minute recess here, and then we'll go back in. Okay.
Okay. Oh, yes. All right.
There we go.
So I'll continue with the, well, I'll start at the beginning. Drought and conservation update. And we're currently in phase 3 with 2 days a week watering, Tuesdays and Saturdays, no more than 10 minutes at each station. And like I usually go over, 70% of our water is imported water from Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. 30% is local supplies, local groundwater from 2 groundwater basins. And then really the update part of this. So, and every month I kind of go over basically the 12-month number, and looking at it in that scale, it comes out to the 15.6% overall. And the reason I like showing this is it kind of shows how in the winter months, typically the conservation numbers are lower. And this graph is October 2014 through September 2015 versus 2013. So I went ahead and I cut off the June, starting at June, and made another graph. So this one's new. I haven't showed this before. So this is June through September, which is our most recent numbers that we have. And what it does is it changes that average, that rolling average. So basically we're at 25.1% right now. And the 20% that we need to cut back in Glendale is from June through February. So it's going to be June of 2015 through February of 2016. And so we're doing great. Everyone's cutting back really well. And we have these higher numbers now in the summer. But what's going to be happening over the winter is those numbers are going to drop off, and we're going to get to that 20% when we get to February. So hopefully that makes sense. Everybody's doing a really good job on our cumulative reductions. Enforcement activities again for September. So we had, and I've broken this out a little bit more from anonymous reports. We've sent out 206 warnings, 41 second warnings, and 28 third warnings. Our water enforcement staff have gone out and watched or taken a look at maybe who's watering on the wrong days or at the wrong times, and they've sent out warning notices that might lead to citations. And our AMI devices have generated, basically we've had 24 leak letters we've mailed out. We've done 29 telephone calls from leaks that our system has shown, 31 field visits, and then just leak alert emails, which the system can generate itself, is 565 that we sent out. And then one update I have on here that's not September data, but in October we actually issued 4 citations based on staff going out, taking photos, seeing someone clearly violating the ordinance. And then, again, directing everyone to our website just for some tips on water-wise gardening. You know, right now, as we're entering fall, it's actually a great time to plant California native plants because it gives them that time over the winter to establish themselves. This is a really good time to do some different plantings. And you can look up some different plantings on our site. And then we've got, currently there's still some more rebate programs and business programs through MWD for some appliance rebates. And Met might be updating this to maybe change some of the rebates and have it last through the end of their fiscal year a little bit longer as well. And that's my update for this month.
Mike, if you could add also the recent information we received from MWD that they're extending their mandatory conservation till next August.
Actually, yeah. So the state is looking at extending the mandatory conservation, and they're still discussing about how to do that and what might happen in. Right now, the ordinance goes, or the mandatory conservation goes through February. They might extend that, and they're pretty sure they're going to do it for like another 270 days, another 6 months. So, and I'll definitely report back on when that happens and what kind of those ramifications are going to be, if that's going to make us stay in one of the phases. But the state is definitely looking at doing that, extending it beyond that February date.
And just to follow up on a related note, because we came to you last month to talk about the drought rate, so that's in turn been back to council. And based on us going back through our budget and looking at some really good budget control we did on our end in trimming our expenditures, we recommended to council that we extend the phase 2 for another 6 months. So we did not increase the drought rate, maintained it at the phase 2 rate. So that will be till next April, at which time we'll go back to the council and review it again.
And that has to do with, I talk about the 70% and the 30% of our supply mix. By cutting back a few percent on Met, like changing those percentages, say from 70-30 to, 35-65, it helps with those expenditures quite a bit on that imported water.
Commissioners, any questions on the drought update?
So You just mentioned that the drought rate, phase 3, phase 3 is extended to April next year.
Phase 3 is in effect, until council
right.
says different.
Right.
The phase 2 drought rate
Drought
is in effect for 6 months. We go 6 months, because we should technically be in phase 3 of the drought rate, but
Right.
we've continued
Right.
phase 2. We do
Right.
those in 6-month increments.
Right, and around now is the time where we were supposed to look at the drought-free rates, I
October.
remember. October?
Yes.
Right.
So they automatically would have changed in October. That's
Right, and so council has decided to extend that another 6 months.
Correct.
Right, yeah, I just want to make sure I heard that right. Okay, great, thanks.
Well, Mr. Zern, a follow-up question for you on that. With when and if the Tier 3 rate goes into effect, replacing the Tier 2 rate, is that retroactive or is that more on a prospective basis? That is to say, wondering whether we are deferring pain because, we're building up cost under the Tier 2 versus 3.
would be the day that it's enacted. Nothing retroactive.
Nothing retroactive, okay.
Right. So it's got a date. It's it'll be mid-April. And so it automatically goes into effect unless council takes action otherwise, and it would be effective from that day forward, not back.
I have one more question actually for Mr. DeGhetto, and that's related. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I had a question.
Please go ahead.
That budget deficit, how it was controlled? Because of reduction of water consumption.
Correct.
So the income is reduced. How it was the budget controlled?
We reduced our expenditures at the same time. So there's a part that we do as well. So if you are using less water, you're obviously selling less water, you're obviously buying less water. But at the same time, we're able to do other things on the expenditure side to reduce our expenditures to help in this effort. So it's not just a matter of laying it all at the feet of the ratepayers. We're trying to do our part on our end as well to keep this as manageable as possible.
Thank you.
So, just to drill down on that, in what areas did you realize those savings?
All over, but primarily it was from our water purchases. That's the biggest one. Water purchases are one of the biggest line items we have in our budget. So that right there provided most of that.
Got it. Commissioner Lowell, did you have any questions?
Yes, I did. There's been some very interesting coverage recently in the LA Times about single users who are consuming vast quantities of water. These users are in the city of Los Angeles or in LA County. I was just wondering if there's any similar monitoring happening at GWP about any particular residential or commercial user who may be consuming larger than normal amounts of water.
Let me answer that question. Absolutely, because we monitor everybody to the best of our ability. That's why we have boots on the ground out in the street. And those 4 citations you saw up there, those are folks that are using water way beyond what they should be. And they've been warned more than once. Believe me, that citation didn't come overnight. So they've had multiple warnings for that. But we absolutely can peg people in the system and when we do that, whether it is from a tip or whether it's something we pick up ourselves, we'll go out and examine that and evaluate that and send people out to see if they're watering on off days. So, we are monitoring that. Now, we have not made any decision to out anybody and publish those in the paper. We're taking care of that through the citation process and expect to get cooperation that way. So I know there was there are some schools of thought that if you try to embarrass maybe those folks into doing it, and I think there's been athletes and actors and celebrities of all types who have been on that list. That's not the situation we're in. We prefer to take care of it, and we had hoped to be able to take care of it all through the education and information process, and unfortunately that didn't work for everybody, so we had to go to a little bit stronger methods, including citations, and so we'll see how those go. But Ms. Valle and her staff are doing an excellent job of keeping people in check when it comes to the use of water beyond what our conservation allows for. And I think having those folks out on the street that we have early in the morning, during the day, and going out investigating these things and taking photos has proven to be very, very effective. Some people have referred to that as a water police type of a situation. But, again, it wouldn't be necessary if everybody did what they were supposed to do. And unfortunately, most people are, as you can see. Those numbers are a result of the vast majority of our residents helping us get to that goal, helping the city get to that goal. And so the few people that are violating it, we've been able to ferret them out and deal with that.
I have one more question for Mr. DeGhetto.
Yes.
In your report about the AMI actions, so there, when you have leaks, you talked about leaks and you talked about visits. So if there's a leak that prompts a visit from the city, can you talk about is that cost borne by the city? Is it borne by the occupant, ratepayer, or does it depend?
It's just part of our normal customer service operation. I mean, if we notice leaks and we have to go out and take a look, I mean, that's just part of, I guess, the budget and the expense of our customer service group. It doesn't really trigger a charge. I mean, anytime that we talk to a customer, there's not a special charge to go out and talk to them. And so because we're in the drought and we have those increased activities to take a look at that, that's just part of the normal business.
Okay, so I hear you saying it's to talk to them, but in terms of drilling down and understanding what is the cause of the leak, is that part of what city staff helps to identify, or is that up to the
that's up to the
resident?
Individual. If it's on their side of the meter, like we say that we notice that there's a leak, our system kind of shows that. It's really up to the customer to kind of drill down. If it's something that we can see when we go out there and take a visit, we'll say, well, it looks like it's your sprinklers, or it looks like it's something coming on your side into the meter box or something like that. Of course, we'll point that out.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions? I would just ask that you keep us posted on the effectiveness of the citations for the water users that receive those. Because, particularly when your bill gets high enough, you might just consider that a cost of doing business and then not change your behavior as well. So I would hope that those citations are effective, and if they're not, then maybe they need to be right-sized based on the nature of offenses.
Definitely.
We'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Clerk, next item.
4C is drought rate update, CIP impact. Stephen Zern.
Mr. President, members of the commission, I think I just covered this. Actually, the drought rate, we were able to keep that, as I said, at the phase 2 rate for another 6 months. I think our budget is fine. It's projecting per what our cost of service analysis was, and we don't see any negative impact at this point, nor do we project any negative impact going forward. Now, we'll see how much rain we get. There's a lot of predictions on what that will be. As Mr. DeGhetto showed you, the winter months are already budgeted as our lowest usage anyway. But if we dip even further below that because of the amount of rain, although the winter primarily is what we account for is the reduction in irrigation. So we'll see how that plays out all together, but I think we'll be fine. I'm projecting that we will be good financial shape and the CIP won't be impacted. As I mentioned to you, any kind of significant revenue reduction, that's the first place you're going to look, is it'll be the pay-go CIP program in the future. But we don't see that as a threat at this time.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to the next item.
4D is legislative quarterly update, SB 350, Silva Orgulian.
Good afternoon, President and members of the Commission. My name is Silva Ugulian, and I'm the Community Outreach Associate for GWP. Today, I'm going to provide you with a very, very brief update on legislative items because since our last update in September, the legislature has been in recess. And I just have a few bills that I'd like to inform you that the governor has signed into law. The first being the SB 350, the Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act, which was signed by the governor on October 7th. And I've updated you in the past regarding what the bill entails. Besides that, we have AB 802, which is regarding energy efficiency benchmarking, and that was also signed into law. And the last one, which we've also mentioned in the past, is AB 1164, regarding water conservation and drought-tolerant landscaping, which was also approved by the governor on October 9th. And the governor had until October 11th to sign or veto any bills, And at this point, we will be returning, or legislature will be returning from recess on January 4th. So we won't have any other legislative updates until the beginning of next year for you all.
Not a lot of surprises there, as you know, but the last time we came to you happened to be right on the tail of the end of the session, but the governor hadn't started deciding to sign or not sign these bills, so I wanted to come back and let you know what actually had become law. And the big one there, I think, is SB 350. Again, not a surprise, something that we had been gearing up for. There was a couple of items in there we wish we would have been able to convince the legislature to include. They didn't, and we'll live with that. Some of them we may hear about again. Net energy metering, and especially, I think, is something that will come back at some point. But we will keep you posted, and as we get wind of anything that is going to be an issue or something we think is going to be put out there right away as the session starts, we'll give you an update on that. Plus, several members of our staff attend the CMUA annual legislative kickoff in Sacramento, as we do for the federal legislation. So we'll keep you posted on anything we hear in that realm as well.
Thank you.
4E is RPS update. Ramona Boeg.
I think Mr. Lon Peters has the pleasure of giving you this presentation. Ramon is going to observe.
Afternoon. I am not Ramona Boeg. My name is Lon Peters. I'm Integrated Resources Planning Administrator. I report to Mr. Boeg, and he did review this, although I don't think he wants to take any responsibility for this. Okay. There are several topics that I want to address this afternoon. This is a table of contents, basically. We want to look back at how we did during the first official compliance period for renewable portfolio standards. There was a little quirk in the law called historic carryover, which we have amazingly enough used, I think, to our advantage. And I'll give you some orders of magnitude on that, and then take a look about where we are right now in the current compliance period, which is 3 years, and then we'll look at over the longer term and see what kinds of challenges we have in front of us, especially given the passage of SB 350. So the first compliance period, we had an average obligation of 20% over the 3-year period. And when we turned all of our numbers in, it turned out to be 21%. We were aiming a little bit high because it was the first time we had to do it, and we didn't know what kinds of difficulties we might run into, and then we might have some art recs disallowed for reasons we could not predict. And so we did aim a little high. There was actually a fairly wide variation. There were some publicly owned utilities in the state who had 0 in their official compliance table from the California Energy Commission. Others had much higher numbers. I think Alameda was close to 100%. So that was another thing we were concerned about. We did not want to fall below the average. We wanted, because we didn't know what other utilities would be doing. We didn't know how the CEC might respond. And so we wanted to make sure that we were complying with the law and didn't fall into the group of utilities who received additional scrutinies because they had not complied with the law. We are facing a fairly slow verification process from the CEC. We turned all the data in 2014, and we expect to have final verification in 2016, which is the end of the second compliance period. So we won't know until sometime next year whether we did okay in the first 3 years. So this is part of the regulatory uncertainty that we face. Historic carryover is a recognition in the statute, AB 32, and the regulations that there were some early adopters, if you will. There were some utilities, both privately and publicly owned, who had developed renewable resources long before there was a requirement, especially in our case, along many, many years before there was a requirement for Glendale in 2011. So the CEC, following the formulas adopted, the methodology adopted by the PUC for the investor-owned utilities, developed a formula for historic carryover that allowed us and others to go back into the 2004 to 2010 period and count how many renewable energy megawatt hours we had actually generated during that period, turn in the documentation, and hopefully be able to carry those over into the future as banked RECs. Basically, RECs we had already generated, and we get to put them in the bank and use them in a future compliance period. The methodology that the CPUC adopted for the IOUs would have severely disadvantaged Glendale. It's just the quirks of the formula. So we went to the CEC and said, we don't think your formula works for us. Here's what we think works for us, and here's all the data. And we were not sure how the CEC would respond because it's a case of first impression. Other POUs were making similar filings, but nothing quite as large relative to the size of Glendale as Glendale was asking for. So we submitted over 360,000 equivalent RECs. They're called equivalent RECs because they were before real RECs. And the CEC has given us a couple of rounds of response, allowing us almost all of what we asked for. And we expect to get a final response sometime next year. And this is a significant victory for us if it carries forward, because we will have roughly 1 year's worth of compliance instruments in the bank at a 33% level if this is finalized and approved. So that'll help the transition to the much higher requirements after 2020.
Before you move on, what is the dollar value equivalent to that? I'm just curious.
Well, that's a very good question. One of the things I'll get into later is the overcompliance we did last year because renewables were so cheap. So there's sort of you could think of a rule of thumb of $10.
I'm sorry?
$10. So if you multiplied that by 10, you get $3.5 million.
Okay.
It can be as high as 20. It's been in the
20.
high single digits at times, but not for long.
Okay.
$10 to $12 probably.
Thank you.
That price is going to vary depending on what the market price of renewable power is at the moment when we take them out of the bank and actually use them for compliance, right?
That would be the value when we, that would be one way of accounting for the value, right? I mean, we could take today's market value of a bucket 1 REC, $10 to $12. We could look at a market value of a bucket 1 REC in 2020, what we have a projection for, and that might be $20. And so the value in 2020 might be a lot higher than it is today. It just depends on market conditions, which do change from day to day.
Right.
Thank you.
So now we have a different type of chart here. Now, this is not regulatory compliance. This is actual energy that got delivered to the residents and businesses of the city of Glendale in calendar year 2014. So other numbers you see here will not match these numbers because those are regulatory numbers, compliance instrument numbers. This is actual megawatt hours. And you can see that in 2014, we actually delivered about 45% of the energy to the city from renewable resources in that calendar year. So we were way over the target from the state, or the requirements from the state. And that was in large part because a couple of things. One is we made a whole long-term 10-year wholesale off-system sale in Nevada that started in 2013, early 14, and goes through 2023. And that took there's a pointer here, isn't there? Maybe there isn't. Okay. That took the purple wedge, the coal wedge, down from about 30 to 35% down to 10% because that coal-fired energy was not coming into the city, not coming into the state. And instead, we went out into the market and found renewables. And we found substitute energy, and it turned out the renewable energy was even cheaper than the non-renewable energy. So we typically buy these products at an index plus price. So the index is either at a trading hub. It might be, say, $30 for generic energy, and then you pay a premium for renewable energy. And the premium for renewable energy was less than the carbon tax effective in the cap and trade system in California. So it made sense. It was Very simple. We just bought the cheapest energy possible, and it turned out to be renewable. And then part of that was because in 2014, there was a large supply of renewable energy in the market because 2013 was the end of compliance period 1, and there was a rush, if you will, to get renewables contracts in place, get projects developed and online in 2013. And then in 2014, there was a crash in the market. Because there were too many renewables out there relative to demand. So we were able to take advantage of the really inexpensive renewables in 2014. And then 8% nuclear, 6% is large hydro, that's Hoover. And the rest is about a third is now Magnolia and Grayson, natural gas. And this went into the product content filing at the CEC, and it's going out to the customers.
Question before you move on. I'm just wondering, has there been a study done on, like, if we were to focus on increasing the local renewables, what the cost would be, compare that to buying RECs? Because we obviously are very heavy in buying the RECs, and why are we not focusing on local renewables?
Well, this is the remote renewables there and the local renewables. That's 6%. All real. That's all energy, right? It comes with renewable certificates. So we're importing or locally generating in that red wedge down at the bottom right, is the landfill gas and a little bit of local photovoltaic solar. Right.
So my question is, why are we not trying to expand, let's say, solar in the city of Glendale rather than buying so many other RECs?
Well, we've looked at the, and I'll get into some more of this later on, but we've looked into the local potential. Mm-hmm. And the IRP showed that we might have 30 megawatts of potential solar rooftop in the city. That's 30 megawatts at a 25% capacity factor, so that gives us 15, 7, 8, a few percents.
Few more percent.
A few percent of that 100%, or a few percent of that 45%, even if we got all of that 30 megawatts. Mm-hmm. Also, we've had some rough quotes from developers who have said, well, we'll come in and here's a reservoir. It's already covered. It's already relatively flat. Mm-hmm. It's clear of wood, large trees, that kind of thing. And the price is roughly $100. We bought these RECs here for last year for $10 over market, so maybe $40.
Now, we just happened to be lucky because the cost was low, but that was not factored in your planning process like years ago when we know that we have to meet this requirement. So I'm just thinking and saying, that local renewables is, I feel, more important and much more valuable than buying the RECs. If we could focus more on more photovoltaic projects locally or even nearby, that, to me, that's better than buying the RECs.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Because it sounds like what you're saying is that the remote renewables that you purchased were actually delivered power.
Yes, they were.
So this wasn't just paper compliance. It wasn't just the RECs.
There are no transferable paper RECs in this diagram at all. So this is all real. This is all real megawatt hours coming into the city. So there are going out to the customers. So it's my understanding that there are 3 means of compliance with the RPS program. It's the actual power on your system, so it's your own owned renewable resource. It's delivered power with the associated RECs. And then there's paper compliance, which is RECs only, where you go out and buy the renewable attributes of some power that was generated somewhere in the western region and then get credit for those. So you're helping the renewable marketplace in our region, but you're not actually getting delivered electrons. Right. So the bill prefers those in those orders. So it prefers you to have a local resource, then it prefers that you deliver renewable power, then it prefers that you get RECs, but that's the lowest on the totem pole. Yeah, it prefers California resources. And then the second order of preference is an external resource that has been, for example, we have wind in Wyoming and we have small hydro in Washington State. Those are old contracts, but if we bought new ones like that, we can't take delivery each minute of that remote resource. So we give the megawatt hours to somebody else. They hold on to them. They sink them, basically. And the simplest example is we do a lot of business with PowerX. And they have a large pond, basically. It's an artificial storage device. It's water in the Northwest. And they can basically just turn down their generation in the Northwest and accept the renewable energy from us, store it, and then deliver it back to us a few months later, a week later, depending on the nature of the contract. But those are all real energy deliveries to the city. And then the third one that Mr. Hale was talking about is just a piece of paper. And we're all very strictly limited in the number of pieces of paper that we can use, and that limit goes down over time. And those are very inexpensive, and we buy the most of them we can because they're under $1. But the cap on the number that we can purchase and turn in for compliance is going down.
Okay, and so we are following that structure.
Yes.
Going in the order of preference.
Yes, we have to,
okay.
Because the law or the regulations say you have to have no less than a certain percentage of what's called bucket 1. It's connected to California. No more than a certain percentage of bucket 3. That's the paper, pieces of paper, and what's left over can be the bucket 2 stuff that's delivered, stored, and then delivered back to us, or generated, stored, and then delivered back to us.
Right. Yeah, I feel that structure is very important in that order, and if there's any way we can even increase on like the more preferred levels, that would be great.
Well, and we did a lot of bucket 1 and bucket 2 short-term business last year. And you're right that 5 years ago it would have been very difficult to predict a particular market condition in 2013, just like natural gas markets are now $2.50 an MMBTU, and 5 years ago they were $5.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's very difficult to predict everything, yeah. And with respect to local renewables, we have been approached by developers who would like to put installations on tops of large commercial buildings or on the reservoirs. We meet with these folks fairly regularly. I think this week we have a meeting set, and in a week or two we have another meeting set. So we give information to the developers about the local sites. We're considering how best to make sure that we have competitive bidding for those sites. So one approach might be to collect an inventory of potential city sites and put an RFP out on the street that says, here's a list of sites, please bring us your proposals. So we thought about that, and then there are privately owned properties that we have to think about too in terms of the net energy metering tariff and the feed-in tariff.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I would like to see that focus on these. You know.
And Mr. President, members of the Commission, I'll just add that, you know, in our search to meet all of the different mandates, the one critical thing is we are looking for the most reasonable priced energy we can find to give to our ratepayers, because anything in there that starts to go up in price goes right back to the ratepayers. So my job, and as I see it, is to find ample, reliable power for our customers at the cheapest possible price, and at the same time meeting all the regulatory requirements. So we have a lot of work left to do, I think, on some of the local stuff, especially as it comes to the pricing and some of our requirements and the impacts it has on the system as a whole, and then what those impacts are to everybody else who isn't a solar customer. And I think that's something we need to consider very, very strongly. We are looking at, as Lon said, large-scale, private, public, community solar projects. But at the end of the day, you know, the driving force is for us to find the cheapest energy we can for our customers. And so if that means it's remote, that's where we go get it, because that's where it's going to be cheapest, as long as we meet the mandates that, you know, that we're required to meet. But keeping the lights on and keeping them on as cost effectively as we can is a primary marching order for us.
So it sounds like we've been fortunate that, you know, looking at this pie chart, we've achieved that 45% number at a very reasonable cost because of the massive development and investment in utility-scale solar energy. My question would be, now that 50% is on the horizon, that price structure is subject to change as more and more utilities are looking to go from 33% to 50%.
Right.
So do you have any sense of, what our next steps are in terms of planning forward for price volatility?
Yes. We'll get to the projections, and then I'll talk about what came out of the IRP that was finished in June. Okay, second compliance period is where we are now, 2014, 15, 16. There's a 25% requirement by 2016 with a showing of interim progress, which is somewhat in the eye of the beholder, in 2014 and 2015. So instead of an average over 3 years, it's now a fixed number in the third year. And what we have filed for 2014 is 30%. Now, this is, again, this is regulatory compliance, which is different from the energy delivered. In this chart, which showed 45%, we only turned in 30% equivalent RECs. And the reason is we turned in all the T-RECs, all the pieces of paper, because those expire. We have to use them. And then we turned in all of our short-term contract RECs, because those cannot be banked. And then we turned in, let's see, I'm not sure exactly what we had left to turn in at that point. Not much. We carried over a lot. So a lot of that 45% that you see in this chart got put in the bank. So we turned in 30% compliance instruments for 2014, and we're estimating 25% for this year and next year. And we're banking the grandfathered resources, and those are the resources that were online before there was a mandate for us. And we will be banking the new long-term contracts as they come online, especially the Schuyler contract that starts the 1st of next month. So we're building a bank, and there will be a chart that shows how fast that bank, not explicitly, but you'll be able to get a sense of how fast that bank is growing. For future compliance periods, before SB 350 was enacted, we had to reach 33% by 2020, and we had 2% steps each year up to that point. Now we have 3 more steps, 40, 45, and 50. There's a typo in there. It's 50% by 2030 and beyond. Apologize for that. Yeah. We'll get there. I'm not worried. So how do we get there in the long term? When we hired PACE, a unit of Siemens, to do the Integrated Resource Plan a little over a year ago, they brought in a methodology, a planning tool that allowed us to run different scenarios. And one of the scenarios we made sure they ran was the 50% by 2030 scenario. So we could see what might happen to our portfolio and how much difference we'd have to make up in order to reach that goal of 50%. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and where we are now, what we have now already under contract in long-term contracts or owned resources, how big the gap is after 2020, or it starts a little after 2020 actually, and what we might do to fill that gap. So this is a bit of a repeat. We have the RPS requirements just in percentages. So you see there's a big jump from 33 to 50. We change that into megawatt hours, and we get to see how this might affect Glendale specifically. So we're at about 300,000 megawatt hours, at about a third of our load right now is renewable. Like I said, last year 45%, this year maybe 25, 30%. With a 50% requirement by 2030, that increases to about 60%, 600,000 megawatt hours. So it almost doubles over the next 15 years. Had we stayed with 33%, it would have started to go down at some point, and it starts to go down later on, and that's because the load forecast shows that loads are declining after about 2020. Very slowly, due to energy efficiency conservation efforts. This is a chart that shows what we already have owned or under contract right now. There's a jump in 2018 when we expect the new landfill gas combustion to come online. This is assuming we tear down the old boilers at Grayson and put in new reciprocating engines up at Shoal Canyon. That jump might be a little bit optimistic at this point. We're recalculating the numbers constantly about what we might expect to get out of that new combustion equipment. After that jump, it's flat on a pro forma basis, and then you start seeing contracts falling away. And these are existing contracts that were signed in some cases many years ago, and they have expiration dates in them, and we have to take those expiration dates into account, because after those expiration dates, we can't count on those resources being there. We might be able to renew the contracts, we might not. The prices might be different, they might not. So in give you a sense of what's falling away there, in 2022, we're losing 10 megawatts of wind in Wyoming. In 2027, we're losing 20 megawatts of wind in Oregon. In 2028, we're losing 9 megawatts of wind in California. And in 2031, it's so small you can't really see it on the chart, we're losing 2 megawatts of geothermal in California. Those are just contracts that are expiring. So at the same time that the requirements are going up, our long-term firm supplies are going down, and we'll have to take some action at some point. So here's the gap. Now, before 2021, you'll see that the supplies, which is the blue line, are actually above the requirements. So that's where we're continuing to build up the bank. And I don't have a number for you right now, but you can see we're building up at maybe, I don't know, 10 to 20, or not quite 100,000 a year in the best year, and then we might get 350,000 out of the historic carryover. So the historic carryover could help us for several years, because we don't have to use that all in one year. That could help us fill the gap in 2022, 23, 24. What we're banking now will help during that period as well. But we have to start thinking toward the end of this decade probably about what specific actions we should be taking in terms of making sure we've got transmission access, checking out what the market conditions are, what technologies are available. And the forecast that came out of the IRP showed that the gap between a generic non-renewable resource price and a generic renewable resource price is forecasted to come down over time as photovoltaic cells become more efficient, as wind turbines become more efficient, as technologies develop that allow wind turbines to look upstream at the wind and rotate accordingly to make sure that they're maximizing production. There are all kinds of things out there that can be done to increase the efficiency of those resources. So the premium that PACE came up with by the late 2020s was only about $10 over non-renewable energy. So in the scale of things, it's not a huge potential cost impact to us of going the additional from 33% to 50%. That's a prediction at this point. It's all subject to change by the time we get to 2020, 2025. We're waiting for storage prices to come down as well to help us integrate these resources.
So while you're on this subject, it seems to me that we have load growth projected from now until 2030, and there's a lot of room there for efficiency and large-scale efficiency projects that may help close the renewable gap that you've identified on the slide a couple pages forward. Yeah, this shows the gap. You'll see that if we go back a little bit here, the blue line on the bottom, or blue boxes, is 33%. That's the 33% by 2020. So that number is a fixed percent applied to a declining load. So that's why that line is actually moving down, is that the energy efficiency projects are saving more energy every year than we're actually adding in terms of load through redevelopment or
new appliances or new computers or anything, those kinds of things.
Oh, I see.
So the load forecast has built into it an energy efficiency savings.
So the
every year.
green curve is the over and above what we would need to purchase in order to get the 20.
The green line's
I
growing
see.
because that 50. We're heading way up toward that 50% line,
Got it.
and that's overwhelming the load reductions that are much smaller. So, but of course, as we look at all of our energy supplies, whether they're conventional or renewable, we also have to look at efficiency opportunities and demand side management.
What percent energy efficiency did you include in your modeling?
I believe it's 1% per year
1% per year?
reduction.
Well,
And over time, that's 1% every year. So 10 years, that's 10%.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of energy to save.
yeah.
That is actually required.
Yeah,
1%.
right. And I feel like your comment is good. And if we are more aggressive and we do better with energy efficiency, then we close the gap a little bit closer.
Right.
I know on your next slide you mentioned review options. Are you going to go over some of those options?
We've been approached by some resource owners who have contracts that were signed, for example, in the early aughts that are expiring in the early 2020s. They're 20-year contracts. So they're rolling off their original counterparty in 2022, for example, or 2023 or 24. Some of those developers, owners, are refurbishing the resources, and they're coming to us and saying, and others, and saying, do you have an interest in any of these? So we've started looking at those. Glendale is constrained in terms of transmission access. So a large number of those resources are in the Cal ISO. And in order for us to purchase a resource from the California ISO that's actually physically located in the ISO, we have to take on a clear price risk. We can sign a contract for a given price, say $75 a megawatt hour, but then we either have to generate it and deliver it into the ISO and then take it back out of the ISO, and there's an export fee to get it out of the ISO to get it to us. Or we leave it in the ISO and we take the price risk because we've paid the developer $75, but then we get paid by the ISO, whatever the price is at that moment in time when the generation actually happens. And sometimes those prices are negative. So we could face a situation where we had agreed to pay $75 to the developer, and on a given hour, we'd have to pay $100 on top of that to the ISO. That's a price risk that I've struggled with for several years, trying to figure out ways to avoid that or lay it off to somebody else or buy an insurance contract that covers that risk, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do it. And the developers have struggled with me, too, to try to figure out how to do it. So that means we're limited to places where we have transmission access now. So we have access at the Meade substation in Nevada. We have access to the Northwest at the Nevada-Oregon border. And then we have connections to the ISO. So if someone could generate it in the ISO and deliver it to us at that point of interconnection, we could take it. But then we'd have an argument with the developer and the supplier about who's going to pay that export fee. So our options are constrained. We're not like Pasadena, which is inside the ISO, and it doesn't matter where the energy is developed or delivered as long as it's delivered into the ISO. It's just a giant bathtub of energy, and they don't have to worry about taking it back out again. So that makes our job more complicated. We have to look at the costs at the bus bar. That's the point where it's generated and integrated into the system. We have to look at performance characteristics. Is it summer peaking? Is it winter peaking? Is it flat? Is it wind, which tends to blow at night? Is it solar, which tends to glow in the day? Do we have transmission access to that point already? Do we have to buy the transmission access? Do we have to build the transmission to get there? There's a very serious bottleneck between here and the east in Nevada, Arizona. LA is trying to solve that problem with planning studies and developing options for building additional transmission capacity, but those studies take a long time. We're trying to work with Los Angeles to get into that discussion so that we could say, well, we'd like 50 megawatts, and we'll pay 50 megawatts out of whatever 1,000 or 1,200, 1,500 megawatts you're building, sorry. We have to look at the cost of integration because that is no small cost, and I think it's going to get more expensive over time. And that was another thing we looked at in the IRP. Should we integrate these resources ourselves, say with a new Grayson, which has units that are designed to move fast and have easy shutdown, turn on characteristics and meet air quality standards, or do we pay somebody else? Los Angeles is the only other real supplier for those services to us besides ourselves. And Los Angeles has recently indicated that they're going to get out of the business because they don't have the flexible resources beyond what they need to serve their own loads and meet their own RPS obligations. So we hope to be able to build units that will take care of that integration problem for ourselves. So we're not stuck looking at we don't even know who would supply these. And it's a methodical process where we go through, we look at what comes in at SCAPA. There are bids all the time coming in there. There are developers calling me fairly regularly, wanting to come by and chat. We screen those. My expectation is that when we get to 2018, we'll probably need to update the IRP. The costs will have changed. We've settled a transmission dispute we hope, with Los Angeles, which will give us more access to the ISO. So our transmission topology will change. It'll increase opportunities. And we probably need to update some of that work, not all of it, not redo the whole thing, but check the inputs, check the results, check the directions that came out of the IRP, and then bring back recommendations to the Commission and the Council. That's it.
I have a question. You might have provided an update on this already, and I might have missed it. If so, I apologize. Can you let me know what the status is with the Glendale solar program at this point for residential and commercial customers?
Yes, we did have a presentation. We made a presentation to council. Let me double check if we may bring that back, or did we have that here? Did we?
Not as part of this report, but we could bring that as a separate report.
We'll bring you the council report that we did. That was a specific request by the City Council for an update on our Solar Solutions program. I assume that's what you're talking about.
How long ago was that? Yeah.
About a month ago.
A month ago? Okay.
Yeah. So we'll bring that to you. We'll put that on the list.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Yes.
Why don't we bring that up during the agenda forecast?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Clerk, what's the next item?
5 is oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Commission may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The general manager may refer the matter to appropriate staff for investigation and report.
Madam Clerk, I don't have any cards. Do you have any cards at the desk?
No, sir.
Okay. With that, oral communication is now closed.
6 is agenda forecast.
Thank you.
So, Mr. President, members of the Commission, we already have one new item on the list, which will be the artificial turf update. If all things going well, we can get that to you that day. We can bring the Solar Solutions update to you at this meeting as well, although we are going over our strategic plan, which I think is the first time we've given you our strategic plan update. The other two reports, water conservation, should be very, very quick, and our customer service update is usually pretty quick too. So we'll put it down there because my sense is we'll probably look to have to cancel the January meeting for the holidays. It's really close to the holidays. We have a lot of people out. We don't want to have you rushing back, and usually that's kind of what gets rolled into the holiday period, and then we'll come back and see you in February.
Okay, so we're not just pushing it back by a couple months, we're canceling it?
Yes.
Right?
Commissioner Chan, we don't have anything. As you can see, we've thinned out the list, and a lot of this has to do with, I think, some discussions that President Hale and I are going to have about maybe looking forward to the new year and getting a little bit different mix of things that we come to you with, hopefully more interesting than some of our routine updates, although we'll keep those on the list as well. we've briefly had a discussion, and as the President's sets the tone for the agenda, we're going to take the opportunity to look and see if there's some other things we can put on there. We've got our business plan for the fiber optics, which I think will be very interesting when we bring that to you. And like I said, we'll keep you up to date on some of our ongoing things. What you saw today from Mr. Peters, that's something we'll keep you posted on for the next probably 10 years as we go through that. But that'll be a regular ongoing update as we talk about that. And there's no question that in this new year, we will be back to you probably more than once to give you updates on where we are with Grayson and the whole repowering of the plant.
And budget is usually occurring around April.
Try
right?
to do it April, May, yes.
April or May,
absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Absolutely.
So members, I think this is a good tentative schedule, and I think once we have our December meeting, if there's anything particularly time-sensitive or urgent that we would need to cover in January, we can always schedule a special meeting in order to tackle anything, if there's a desire to do so. So it looks like we have agreement, I think, to add the artificial turf report to our next meeting and the solar solutions report. Any other changes that members would like to make to the agenda forecast?
Do you want to put down budget for April or May?
We'll put budget down tentatively for May.
For May?
Yes, and then April would tentatively be an update on the drought rate because that's about when it comes due again. So we'll talk to you about that.
Okay, that's right.
So those are two I can think off the top of my head. I would give you some of the others, but we don't have definitive dates on those yet. But you can bet in that spring period we'll be back at least once to talk about Grayson.
Right.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, I think we've got our
7,
forecast.
adjournment.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Without objection, we are now adjourned.